And I'll reveal the dirty little secret about lawyers here. Everyone, stay tuned.
There's plenty of them.
Yeah. This is the real one.
When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode 27 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snellings Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. Today we are joined by my friend and business coach, Charley Mann. Charley is a man of many talents and many hobbies. He spent the last decade at Great Legal Marketing, where he served as the Chief Marketing Officer for 8 years and the President and Lead Coach for 3. Now he's embarking on a new journey and starting his own business, Firm Alchemy, where he coaches law firm owners to transform their practices through the power of effective marketing. Charley, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Scott, great to be talking with you. We're going to have a grand old time here. I'm certain of that.
Absolutely. So you are wearing a shirt that says, "Be awesome and learn stuff." And if I had to sum you up in one phrase, I think that would be it. So spot on, my man.
Appreciate it. Look, I've started any place that I have a bio. One of the things I'm starting to include is that I am overwhelmingly energetic and extremely curious.
Absolutely. And with a theater background, you're quite the performer as well.
You know, I mean, look, it's been one of the great blessings to have that background, a blessing I didn't know I was getting at the time, to say the least. But being able to put on a good show, there's actually an email marketer that I follow. His name's Ben Settle, and he uses the phrase infotainment, right? And so that's what I look at it is, what's the one news show that in the past, at least before it switched hosts, had one of the most prominent rates of absorption of information and people who said it was their favorite source of information? And that was The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, because it was infotainment, not just information. So just following in the footsteps of wiser people than me.
There you go. All right. So as we start with all of our guests, tell us, where were you born? How'd you grow up?
So I was born in Denver, Colorado. From there, I moved a few times, to say the least. I moved to Maryland. That's where my brother was born. Moved to Michigan. That's where my sister was born. Michigan was the place that for a long time I considered home, because I lived there for all of 5 whole years. And that was long enough to be my longest stint in a place for a long, long time. So I'm a Michigan Wolverines fan. I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan. I'm the occasional Detroit Lions fan.
Ooh.
Probably this year I will be.
All right.
And then from there, moved to Texas before finally. So I lived in Texas, right? And I lived in the Woodlands for just about 2 years, and went to Knox Junior High there, and then moved to Virginia, Southern Virginia, and then went to college in Northern Virginia. So I just kind of bounced around a lot before becoming a theater major at George Mason University, as you alluded to, and then eventually making my leap into the quote unquote real world. My dad was an FBI agent. He transferred to different positions. That was one of the things. To move up in the FBI, you often had to shift offices. And the dirty little secret, we didn't love it in the Woodlands, Texas. We didn't live in a cooler area like Frisco.
Right.
So we were all oil money in Texas, and that didn't fit our family well.
There you go. Well, and the humidity down in the Houston area is a bit tough. A bit tough. You get the heat like we have up here, but the humidity added to it makes it pretty rough down there. So moving around a lot like that, how did you deal with that as a kid growing up? Was that tough on you, or did you just naturally kind of figure things out?
So it's interesting. I don't think it was tough on me, Scott, until 5 years after I graduated high school, weirdly enough, because I didn't know what was going on at the time and what was happening as I moved around. You know, look, no kid wants to move around a lot. You would like to have your group of friends. You don't want to move right before 8th grade and have to figure it all out again in the 1 year of middle school before then you deal with the whole like going into high school and refiguring yourself out. Turns out there were huge pluses and minuses. The plus and minus was the same thing, is that you get to figure out your identity all over again when you move from a place. When I lived in Texas, I was supposed to be a football player. I had signed up to play football. I would have probably been like at best a lowly B team, like third string safety. Like that might have been my max position I could have achieved at the time. I didn't know how to produce athletic feats, to say the least.
Right.
But then moving to Virginia, I basically gave up sports because I was refiguring myself out. And 2 years after living in Virginia, I started doing theater and I found a new identity there. Now we're talking about theater, which is all about finding your own identity and who you are. What I didn't realize is all that moving around did two things for me that hurt, that I've had to undo over the last decade, really the last 5 years of concentrated work. The first was that identity, figuring out who you really are. And what I've discovered is I'm not alone in that. There are a lot of people out there who I've worked with, coached, et cetera, who they're still figuring out identity. And then number two, I kept my relationship circle smaller than it needed to be. And this is one of the things that I've heard from a lot of people about recently. And you kind of hear these echoes in your world when you start discovering new ideas, which credit to Dave Fries, who talks about the reticular activating system, which is your brain just recognizing what you're thinking about. It's classically, if you buy a new car, right, you're suddenly going to see that car everywhere on the road.
Right.
Because of your reticular activating system. And so I've noticed a lot of other people who are damaged in the way that they create relationships because I didn't have a core community. I didn't unconsciously or subconsciously create community. I had to go through the process of consciously becoming a community and relationships person. And that's been a big theme for me over the past few years. So that was the blessing and curse, because at least now I have that conscious web that I've created for myself that has benefited me so much over the past few years. But yeah, man, moving around, not great, but also once you recognize the damage that it's done, you can turn it into a huge plus for you. So that's the long-winded answer to the simple question.
So anytime I meet or speak with theater people, it's a different group, right? It's kind of a different mentality. It's I'm not calling them weird. I mean, hey, I was in plays, right? But it's a very specific type of person that gravitates toward theater. Were you someone who ended up in theater because you were trying to retransform yourself, refigure yourself out? Or is that something that you were always kind of drawn to?
So, mostly drawn to, but again, didn't totally recognize. I didn't understand. My mom was actually the one who really identified and said like, hey, you should go try and do a play or something like that. Maybe she just needed me to burn off energy since I wasn't doing sports, but great.
Hey, that'll keep them at school later than just coming home right after the bell, right?
Dude, my school day, I mean, I was there an extra 2 hours plus almost every single day throughout almost the entire year. And I will tell you this, after I started doing theater, my grades went way up. My grades were not great at first. As soon as I started doing theater, grades went up because it's like having a kid, right? All of a sudden you have to get parts of your life organized because everything is occupied. We went and saw a lot of shows, a lot of musical shows when I was younger. And now I'm not a singer. I really can't sing well, so I never ended up doing musicals. But that was the gateway drug for theater that really excited me. It was cool, the idea of putting on a show. I didn't consciously understand like, hey, I'm trying on other identities, all of that stuff. But I took drama one, the first half of my sophomore year of high school. And Russ Staggs, God bless the man, like truly, God bless that man for providing me mentorship and a space to succeed. And boy, oh boy, that was huge, Scott. A space where I was able to understand what it felt like to create your own success. And doing that in high school, I remember trying out, like he urged me to try out for Christmas Carol. So that was my first ever play, was doing a Christmas Carol. And I remember, Scott, there was a form that you fill out before you go into the audition. And part of it was like, what parts do you want in the show? And I wrote in giant letters, tech, for the tech crew. I was so scared of being on stage, man. I was like, just put me in the tech crew. Don't you dare make me go on stage, even though I'm going in there and quietly in the back of my head, I would love to be the star of the show. And then I wrote in very small letters, or ensemble. So he ended up casting me in 3 separate parts in the show.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah. So I was young Scrooge. I was the guy who he's selling off some of Scrooge's stuff when Scrooge is with Ghost of Christmas Future. And then I was a party goer who got slapped in the face. And those were my 3 roles. And from there, like, it was finding community that drove me deeper and deeper into it. That was the initial, like, yeah, it was cool to be on stage. And it turns out I just love that. But it was finding people who felt like my people that was a big driver for me.
All right. So I think the vast majority of people, when they're forced to quote unquote take the stage for the very first time, right? Whether it's, stand up and give a book report in class, or actually be on the stage, or have their first public speaking, if you will, that is something that is horrifying, right? Because we're all our own worst critic. Everybody's going to judge and laugh at us, when the reality is most people probably aren't even paying attention. But
that's right.
What is it that made you take that step? Because you could have absolutely said, no, I'm not going to do it. I just want to be a tech. If you want me in, then I'm going to be a tech. So what was it that either pushed you or drove you to take that step to go get out on that stage and perform?
That is entirely a Russ Staggs thing. So Mr. Staggs, he was really good at finding kids who quite clearly, like within the confines of the class, I'd grown a lot during that semester. And so he had seen up close that this kid probably did want to get on the stage. He just didn't know how to do it in front of people he wasn't familiar with yet. And so he was willing to just tell me, like, hey, guess what? These are the parts that you're going to get. I even, like, the memory's hazy, but I think I even asked him, like, hey, do I have to do all of this? And he basically said, you should, or you're going to regret it. And so he ended up pushing me into all of that. And that made such a huge difference in my life that he just recognized this kid should probably be on stage. And he put me up there. I mean, look, I was terrified to be up there, but he made it happen. And that was just such a huge blessing. Like, thank God for Russ Staggs.
All right. So Russ clearly had a huge influence on you. He picked you out. He helped you to grow and to kind of find what it meant to find success on your own, I believe you said. What kind of influence did he have on you in terms of getting into the coaching arena?
So the first job that I ever wanted was, well, actually, technically the first job that I ever wanted was to be a youth pastor. There was a guy who was really, really huge in my life, Sean, who he ended up moving away from the church. And so interestingly, you're kind of seeing like finding your role models along the way.
Right.
So Sean had been my first role model. He was the youth pastor, and Sean was someone who really inspired me. But when he left and he was replaced by someone else, I was searching for a new mentor. And Russ ended up being that mentor. And what he was doing is he was teaching the same way that Sean was teaching, that both of them were leading people. And I looked up to that and I said, boy, oh boy, I want to lead people. I want to make people progress. So I just found myself looking at people who were doing this. And with Russ, the big thing was, I want to give back what I got. And that's kind of my journey through life, Scott, is I have been fortunate enough as this kid who moved around a lot to each point along the way, find someone who said, look, there's something here. Because Sean was kind enough to allow me to get involved in like some of the tech production in the church and stuff. But each step along the way, finding that person who's invited me and said, you've got something here. Let's make something of it. Let's not let this go to waste. And so it's actually interesting. Right before us recording this, Scott, I was talking with a coaching client, brand new. This was only our second call together. And we were focusing on the idea of maximizing your talents. And I told him, like, hey, he's got all these goals that'll help a lot of people. And I told him, let's not forget about just maximizing you and who you are. And I've been drawn to that since then, because how many people, and I've taught theater camps, obviously now with the coaching, how many people are out there who have talents that they're just waiting for someone to come along, grab that little bit of talent and hold it up, shine a light on it and say, this is you, and you have my permission to blow this up big and make this part of your world. And you need to do it because the world needs more of this. And that could be as simple as someone who is really shy, but extremely kind. So I had a friend who I talked with. I don't know how much she took the advice. Advice for friends, always a little difficult. So look, you are one of the most kind people that I know, but right now you are kind mostly to people who you've gotten to know, even though you talk about the type of kindness that you could do for others. Like some of the stuff, have you ever walked along? So I actually can recall a very specific story for myself. I remember there was a day when my neighbor, who had been recently diagnosed with cancer, and his wife, she's got her own ailments that she's dealing with. I noticed that his trash can was out front and it hadn't been pulled back in. And it was a weird little defining moment of, am I the type of person who goes over to that trash can and just pulls it up without saying anything, just perform that act of kindness? Now, a lot of people go, I don't want to interfere. Maybe it's out there for a reason, right? There's a million reasons not to do it, even though we know it's just simply the right thing to do. And that was how she kind of felt in the world. There were acts of kindness she wanted to do for others. She wanted to bring the casserole over to a person's house who she heard was having a tough time, or whose kid, broke their arm or whatever. She wasn't doing it. I told her, make that who you are. Be unabashedly you, because the world desperately needs the person who brings the casserole over. And it's those little parts that we hide that we need great mentors, we need great coaches, we need great leaders that bring it out from all of us.
Earlier, you mentioned that you had these teachers, and you called them teachers, and then you transitioned into the word leaders. But as we know, not all teachers are leaders. So what makes a solid leader? I mean, you've been around a whole bunch of law firm owners. I'm sure a whole bunch of other leaders in your journey. What makes a good leader?
Look, man, I think you and I share a core value of extreme ownership, right? That's part of your law firm. I'm a big believer in that. Scott, it's something that you live out, which is I'm going to own the big decisions. I'm not just going to sit back and pontificate about it. I'm going to own it. You think about in the military, when a military leader has to send troops into battle, they do so owning the fact that there will be consequences to that, good and bad. And the bad ones are deeply tragic. Are you willing to step up and own what could end up being a catastrophic failure and still going back and doing the job afterwards? That, to me, that's a leader. So Rustags, as a leader, we were putting on shows. You have to get the show up on its feet. He's responsible for seeing it through organizing all these kids. And in some of these shows, man, there were 35 of us high schoolers, organizing a bunch of high schoolers, getting us to put on these shows, having us show up for tech weekends. And by the way, if kids didn't show up, who was busy building the sets? Russ was busy building the sets, because at the end of the day, it was his job to lead and to own the outcome. I think great leaders really own the outcome. They're not trying to pawn that off onto other people. Now, great leaders also know when they can't put in the personal effort, right? There are things in your firm that you're not going to do on a day-to-day basis because you're busy with big strategic work for your clients, your big strategic work for the firm. And leaders know when that line needs to get drawn as well. And that's really, really important. Russ, there's a lot of directors who in high school will do what's called a line reading. And that's supposed to be a no-no. A line reading is where you tell the person exactly how you want the line to be said. And they're just supposed to echo you. But that means that they have no ownership over it.
Right.
Instead, Russ would ask us questions, would put us through exercises to try and get the outcome that he was looking for. that we were then fully bought into. And that's another way that I would separate leadership from someone who's just teaching. Just teaching would have been, here's your line reading. You're going to say that line this way. Let's move on with it. A leader says, here is why that line might come out this way. Here's the exercise you can go through. Here's how you're going to take ownership of that character. And that's leadership.
Yeah, and quite frankly, it's way harder to do it that way, right? And way more time consuming because
dude, it's so time consuming. I mean, you have that experience
every day, yeah. And one of the things that we're working on with the leaders in our firm is, hey, the super easy thing to do when someone comes into your office is answer the question.
Yeah,
answer the question so you can get back to what you're doing because you have a full plate and they have a full plate, and that's the easiest thing. But what if we took the extra 30 seconds to say, all right, what do you think the answer is? Right? That one simple question, it's amazing because then they talk out loud, you hear where they're coming from, and you can identify where the missing step in their logic is, or where they need to be mentored or tutored or taught. Or, yeah, that's exactly right. Why did you come to me with that question? Right? Because
you say that a little bit nicer than that tone.
Yes. Yes. You don't raise your eyebrow like I did if you're watching this. But no, seriously, say, okay, why did you need to come to me with that question? Did you not feel confident in that? And that's usually the answer, right? Because the vast majority of times when I ask that question, they have the right answer. And so then it becomes incumbent on us to say, hey, make the call. Make the call. I'm trying to insert that into my vocabulary more. Make the call. Because it provides the ownership to them, right? Hey, they did have the right answer. Now they have the confidence. Now go get it done. And that's how people grow.
Yeah. And you're right. It is harder to do. It does take more time, but that's an investment. And you and I, Scott, have talked about the difference between within the 7 stages of law firm leadership that we work through. We've talked about the difference between like matriarch, patriarch, which is a firm that feels like a family, and families are kind of notorious for not always asking questions and maybe not digging to the root of the problem. Then you have this captain of the ship level, which is the next one up. And that's where you tend to be leading the way that you're talking about as the first form, Scott, which is the not really leading. It's telling people what to do. Because when you're captain of the ship, sometimes in a storm, there's not time to let people figure it out.
Right.
They need to tie that knot over there because we need the sail to whip this way. And I don't have time to explain it. But with someone like you, right, and others that I coach who are in this leader of leaders phase, that's where it's your job to have other captains of their individual ships within what is now a fleet that you have. And your job is to lead those captains. They can take care of asking the day-to-day questions. They can take care of people popping in and saying like, hey, I'm not sure how to do that. But when those leaders are coming to you, you have to recognize I'm not here to have someone who just does what I say. It's someone who knows what to do. And that's the journey that we're on, right? Is being a leader of leaders, of instilling these traits in everyone. And it's why having things like core values, it's why working on the culture of any business, including a law firm, is so important. So that way you can elevate and live as a leader and then do one of the most rewarding things as a leader, which is to grow other leaders. That's really exciting.
Absolutely. So how does a theater major end up legal law or law firm owner coach? Take us through that. Not exactly a smooth transition right there.
No, well, it wasn't a smooth transition, although in some ways it was. So there was one thing that I wanted more than being an actor or a director. I always wanted to be more of an actor than a director, which are most actors talk about wanting to be a director. I wanted to be an actor. But what I wanted more than that was to be a husband and a father. And it was funny. I was listening to, who's the guy who runs Fort Worth Music Academy? What's his name again?
Eric Barassa.
Eric. I was listening to Eric talk about, he wanted to be a rock star, right? And then he started dating his girlfriend, who's now his wife. Similar story. So I started dating Missy in college, and I figured like the odds were in our favor that we were probably going to get married. Just had that inkling. And I knew I wanted to be a husband and a father. So upon graduating, rather than do the let's move out to LA, or let me try and do a bunch of shows in DC. I decided, let's embark on a professional career first. Let's figure out how to support a family, because it's not like live theater, fortunately, isn't going anywhere. I actually have plans right now, Scott, to go and do some staged readings. I'm going to try and work that out with some local theater companies. But because of that, I went and I applied for a job with this guy, our mutual friend, Ben Glass. And he had this crazy job ad on Craigslist for a marketing assistant for his two companies, Ben Glass Law and Great Legal Marketing. And I was like, this is really cool. This guy in this job ad is saying, if you were the type of person whose parents needed to check your homework, you're not going to be a good fit for this position. I was like, well, there's a loophole there. What if you were the person who didn't do any homework? Would I be a good fit for that?
Ergo, nothing to check.
Exactly. I mean, they weren't checking my homework and I didn't do it. I was better on tests. I'm a clutch player. That's the way I like to put it.
There you go.
And, he said, like, look, if you just want to get a job flipping burgers at McDonald's and doing the same old thing, this is not going to be the right place for you. I was like, this is the right place for me. So I interviewed with a bunch of places. I had, I think 7 different job offers that were actually made to me, but it was very clear that the one I wanted above all the rest was working for Ben. And in the interview, and I remember that interview so well. And you've heard this story before of a younger version of me walking into the interview room, and I've got these pleated pants on. I had the clothes on that, like, your dad shows you, hey, you're going to go to an interview, you need to wear these clothes, right? And it's always the really cheap versions from the department store. Right. I don't know if people still shop at department stores these days. Probably got it from Kohl's or something. And it's these pleated black pants that had pleats upon pleats upon pleats. I mean, I basically had birthing hips as a young man in these pants. And I had this silvery disco-y shirt on. I basically looked like a 6'1" fishing lure. That's the line that I like to tell whenever I'm on stage. It was true. And I went in there. He gave me this book, Outrageous Advertising by Bill Glazer. Soon enough, he's handing me these books by Dan Kennedy. He's sending me to events, taking me to mastermind groups. And then the longer arc of it was, once I started to better understand the value of conversing with everyone, I discovered what my little power, my superpower was. What it was pattern recognition, especially in a profession where it felt like patterns were not being well cataloged. So I could see these little patterns of success that you would hear, like, one here in this room, and then you would hear the same thing repeated over in this room, but there wasn't always a person putting one and one together and then figuring out how to take one and one and teach other firm owners that. So started having those conversations and getting more and more excited about that, being able to put that forward, which was using just innate gifts that I had, which was the pattern recognition combined with a deep desire to do the infotainment side, right? To have an audience, to teach, to lead, to have impact. Really leading and having impact that gets me up in the morning. It keeps me excited. And then I start working one-on-one. I'd worked in mastermind rooms, and I start working one-on-one with lawyers like you, with firm owners like you, Scott, and had this group of them where I just saw how deep and impactful these relationships could be. And over the course of, the 10 years leading up through kind of leading some smaller groups, then leading mastermind groups, then working intimately with firm owners, I was like, I'm so all in on this, because, and I'll reveal the dirty little secret about lawyers here. Everyone stay tuned.
There's plenty of them.
Yeah. This is the real one. Lawyers were made as perfect products coming out of law school, right? Like, you were made to be a high wage earner, mostly in someone else's firm. So what's so interesting is, how do we take a person like you, Scott? Now, you have just this natural kind of entrepreneurship to you. So I don't have to force the hand as much with you. But there are other clients where the work is, you don't have to be a lawyer within your own law firm. You can if you want. I'm not going to tell someone that's an evil. That's not at all. It's know thyself is so important. But we need to decouple your identity of being the lawyer from your ability to build the firm. We should get to the point where within your own law firm, you're not even the best lawyer. because you're so good at finding and building talent. That leadership thing, this is an amazing skill that you have. It's the director. The director can't be the actor on the stage. The director has to figure out how to find great actors and let them use their gifts. Even though a lot of directors start as actors, it's time to let other people be the best actors. So that way you can be the best director. Same thing with owning a law firm. You're going to be the director. You're eventually just going to be the producer of the whole show. And you're looking for other people to put their own talents in there for you.
So coming out of college, you go to work for Ben, and you're 22, 23 years old. I assume don't know the first thing about law firms. Doesn't sound like you had much in the way of experience in marketing. And Ben starts handing you all these books. Presumably you read all the books. What else did you do to get to the point where you had enough expertise in it to where you could put things together and recognize these patterns and know how to teach it?
One of the biggest things was, the two main things. And it's one of the things I teach often is the idea of applied principles. So it's not enough to learn the principles. You have to actively apply them as soon as you learn them. So if it's a principle from, say, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of my all-time favorite books by Stephen Covey, it's not enough to read the book. You need to, as soon as possible, consciously put it into play. Like as soon as you can figure out, oh, I'm about to react, I will not react. Instead, I will respond, right? From principle number 1 of be proactive, which doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means. Put it into place. That way we have an applied principle. And then the other side of it was, don't ask permission. So, well, today I am an entrepreneur. Before today, I was an intrapreneur within Ben Glass Law, but mostly within Great Legal Marketing. And so it was, I don't need to ask to start putting together great material for law firm owners because it benefited GLM, right? So I'm just going to build it. I'm going to say this is a great thing for us to build. And that was something that was needed within the organization. And so just constructing these materials and then, quite frankly, having this incredible laboratory of law firms through GLM that were executing on these materials and then paying attention to the feedback loop, right? Okay, cool. Everyone's using this particular referral strategy and we're hitting what sounds to be 60 to 70% success rate on it. Great. I'm going to catalog that. Let's make it part of the core programs and go forward with it. Again, just using pattern recognition. If I'm using my skill set, that was what was most exciting. And then, honestly, Scott, the next stage of it, where really focusing on truly coaching, was finding the ties that bind. That was really important. What were the ties that bound me to these incredible men and women who I had the good fortune of sharing the insight that I was gaining with them and seeing it positively impact their lives? Best thing that ever happened to me for that was having my first kid and recognizing I'm coaching moms and dads to be home with their kids, to provide for them. And oh, by the way, I'm coaching job creators. And that was hugely motivating. I'm coaching people who are leaders in their communities, things that I was starting to do myself. All of a sudden, these were the ties that bind. We're all just these people with different vehicles of how we're making impact. I happen to have a select set of knowledge, skills, tools that help law firm owners like you produce at a higher level and put your unique tools, skills, et cetera, to use at a higher value. And that ties that bound. That was what made me go, I'm going to do this. Hell or high water, these are going to be my people, and I'm going to make a level of impact that it could be for 25, it could be for 2,500, but every person whose life I will be able to touch will be deeply felt by what they experience.
So in the course of helping all these different law firm owners, and obviously just living your life and kind of out of that prism of a coach and going outside of the law firm arena to various businesses that you interact with, what are some of the primary mistakes that you're seeing business owners make, both within and outside of the law firm arena?
Number one is thinking that the product will sell itself. Honestly, that's really high up there in terms of a big mistake, is just assuming that all we have to do is work on the product and the rest will take care of itself. I do come from my own bias of marketing and sales. Now, on the flip side, if you have great marketing and sales and your product is garbage, you're going to burn yourself to the ground real fast.
Right.
To me, a good product is the ante to play the game. Everything else, making it absolutely exceptional, you should be working toward. But once you have a good product, you need to get great at marketing that product. So that's one of that would be the number one, thinking the product that'll sell itself. The second one is the internal thought of, it can't be done that way for my business. You hear a great idea, but for some reason you've just built up this chain of no's that you keep adding another link to that chain. And you keep saying, well, that won't work in my business. And eventually you just surround yourself with so many of those chains that you're not doing anything. Suppose it's like Jacob Marley in A Christmas Carol. Look at that, bringing it
full circle.
Full circle. Having that chain that you're constantly building, and the more times that you build another link on that, the more weight you have on yourself, the more tightly you are constricted. And at that point, what's easier to do? To add another link to that chain or to try and break free? It's easier just to add another link. And people get caught there until someone comes along with the proverbial bolt cutters and starts disproving each one of those links in the chain until they finally find that one link that seems to make all the chain fall away. So those would be the two big things. Don't assume the product will sell itself, and stop saying it can't be done. The bigger question is it what you want to do? Do you want the $5 million business or the $500,000 business? Either one is a-okay. The only thing that's not okay is being unhappy with it and doing nothing about it.
You know, one of the things that we've both seen through the Mastermind group and have talked about is, especially with law firm owners, I assume that other owners are like this too, but nobody can do it as good as me.
Yeah. Huge issue.
Tell me about that.
I mean, look, man, you were a gift to work with in this way. You have been, in that you were pretty quick to turn that idea on its head and to recognize that you could bring in people who would operate at a high level. And well, I know that all of us still operate with this little sneaking suspicion of, if I were allowed to step full time into that role, I still think I could probably do it better, but it is better done at that person's best all the time than done at my best 15% of the time. So the whole idea of being the best, first off, it's just not true. Like, I don't even know how to, sometimes I don't know how to combat it with certain people because they're so insistent that I am the best. And I go, you're probably the best at certain things. I have no doubt about it. But if you own a business in particular, or let's say you're the marketing director in any business, but you also know that you're really good at the technology stuff and you're pretty good at the hiring stuff. And like, this is me talking to the 26-year-old version of myself who's getting good at a lot of stuff. You are best served being amazing at your one thing and getting out of the way on the other stuff. Because if you just focus on what you are great at, that is your path forward. So I know a lot of stuff and I could do a lot of stuff. Like, I could have stuck around just in doing marketing. I could have been middle management. I could have been upper level management. But when all those things kind of coalesce together on what I need to be doing, I need to be leading coaching for law firm owners, and I need to learn how to let go a lot of stuff. So there's actually a lot of complexities that I've let go of in my current business. The whole model for it is a level of simplicity. If you're a law firm owner, just be the best owner. Because guess what? There's only one of you. And if you're not focused on how to be the best owner, who's going to do that job?
Right. Right.
Really. Like, if you, Scott, aren't focused on being an amazing owner, which comes with it, how do I lead? How do I set strategy? How do I create culture? How do I elevate people? How do I hold the bucket, for everyone else? The buck stops here, all that stuff. If you don't improve in that way, no one else is going to do it for you. That's kind of the coolest thing about being an entrepreneur, right? Is now I have total ownership of a position no one else can do. Are you doing it at your best ability? That's the question.
Yeah, fantastic point. One of the things that I love doing that we've talked about is talking with other business owners and sharing ideas. And one of the first things I ask whenever we first sit down is, do you have a coach? And the vast majority of them don't. And so I go on my rant of, hey, look, Michael Jordan had a coach, Tiger Woods had a coach, you need a coach. So for those people who maybe are thinking through that process, what are some things they should be looking for in terms of hiring the right coach for them?
The number one thing is, you got to jive with the person. Something nice and esoteric, right? To kick things off, right? I could be given an actual checklist here and I'm starting with jive. By the way, I use the word groovy with a certain frequency. You do want someone who you jive with, who shares similar values to you. There are a lot of coaches who can do the job well. And the other thing you want to think about is, what am I looking for from my coach? Because you might be looking for maybe someone who's more of a between the ears coach, right? Someone who's strictly mindset, because you just know you've got so many mindset roadblocks and you've gone to the conferences, maybe you've participated in the mastermind groups, and what you need is an individual coming in with hammer and chisel and just driving away at that particular block, as opposed to, okay, I'm in the midst of my next stage of entrepreneurial journey. I need someone who can guide me through this full picture. I'm the owner of something and can help me with both the business and what personal hangups I might have with that type of growth. I'm certainly conversing about what I do primarily. It's transformation of the owner to create transformation in the firm. So you want to know what you're really looking for from a coach, because a good coach is going to ask you, what are we trying to do here? And from there, when you're evaluating coaches, what have they published? Can you get on the phone and talk with them, paid or free? Look, if you really think someone might be a good coach and the only way to talk with them for the discovery session is to pay for it, pay for it. You'll be grateful for it. If they're a great coach, they're going to teach you stuff on that call you wouldn't have gotten otherwise anyway. So it'll be well worth the money that you pay. Or a free discovery session. Get on there and actually talk with the person. Figure out your comfort level. And then when you go into a coaching relationship for the first time, you should expect there to be some process of that person getting to know your business, even if they have experience in your field. I have a ton of experience coaching law firm owners, but I also recognize that I have to figure out, is this a criminal defense attorney who's looking to do felony cases in addition to like DUI misdemeanor cases? Where's their gift in terms of sales versus managing people, et cetera? So we have to find that material. And then we can really start producing at a faster pace of action items, accountability. And I would say, if you are looking for a business coach in particular, if you're a smaller business, not necessarily a huge business, if you're more than 10 million, maybe this doesn't apply. But if you're a smaller business, you're looking for someone who isn't in one of the two major camps, which one of the camps is, all I'm going to do is ask you questions. Right? Because most people, they really need a coach who's also going to step in and provide some strategy and say, like, look, here's experience from other people. Here's what we've done with other firms. They're not just going to ask you questions, but at the same time, they're also not going to monologue at you. Now, I'm monologuing through this basically this entire podcast, but that's not the case. Like when you and I are talking,
right?
Not me monologuing at you. This is a different scenario. And you want someone who's going to ask you the questions, and then understands when they need to step in and go, let me provide you with a framework here. So just listen for the next 5-10 minutes. I'm going to lay out a framework. I'm going to tell you what it is, how it works, and why it functions this way. And then let's figure out if it's the right thing for your business. So that, as all of my answers are, long-winded answer to a tighter question.
Well, but I think it's so important, especially the fact that you started off with you got to jive, right? Because how many times and have our discussions kind of begun and ended with things outside of the office, right? Yeah. Because as with any leader in any role whatsoever, your personal life is going to affect how you operate at work, right? No matter how much you shield it, no matter whether your team has any idea. But I remember specifically one instance where, man, I was at burnout times, 10. And that's a frequent topic with you and me, actually. But one time was specifically, and you kind of coached me through that, and ended up sending me a painting. And that painting hangs in our kitchen right now, and it's a picture of a coffee cup with the coffee is full and overflowing. And we never would have gotten to that specific of a conversation without the trust being there, right? And I think when you jive with someone, it's easier to develop that trust and be able to open up. So when I'm asked the question of what do you look for in a coach, that's pretty much my first answer too, is you got to jive, meaning you got to have the ability to relate to each other to develop that trust. Because without the trust, then there's just not going to really be much basis in the coaching that's going to go and provide any kind of momentum.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that makes for a really good coach, like beyond evaluating a coach, is that type of call that you're talking about that we had is a very easy call for someone to get on. And if they're really like, they have their program as a coach, they have their 3-step waltz that they're doing. I will ask at the beginning of our call, like, what's the best thing that's happened to you recently? And if I hear the heavy sigh, or if I hear the person searching desperately for an answer, I'm not just going to move on to business, right? I'm going to ask, what's going on? Like, let's step back here. And one of the reasons being is someone like you, Scott, you're going to operate like a thoroughbred stallion, right? You want to get out and you want to race. That is just how you perform. And sometimes a business owner who's a thoroughbred stallion doesn't know when they're overtired. And they need someone to hear it and recognize, like, hey, I get it that you feel like you're running at a sprint, but I'm watching you and you're running at a jog that maybe feels like a sprint to you. So I'm going to grab the reins here. We're going to pull back and we're going to settle things down for a little bit. Don't worry, you're going to get the sprint again real soon. But let's settle and find our place, relax, recover, so that we can go back out for a sprint and not for a jog.
Awesome. All right, my man. Well, I'm getting the signal. We're almost out of time. So we got to go with my final questions. And I hope this is a very difficult question for you, but top 3 books. You've already said one of them, so you only have 2 left.
Yeah. So because I listened to the show, I was prepared for it. And I took a little bit deciding what the books would be. I knew that 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was going to be one of the books. And I decided on 2 fiction books for the others.
All right.
One of them is Wonder Boys by Michael Chabon. It is one of my favorite works. I don't know why it connected with me when I first read it, but I reread it every couple of years. It was made into a very bad Michael Douglas movie back around like 98 or something like that. But Chabon is one of my favorite authors overall. And the other book is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. It's not only really interesting because I enjoy fantasy and sci-fi and all that stuff, but it's an interesting look at how people elevate things like television is a god in the book because there are so many people that believe in it. Essentially, it's a book full of false idols and how that concept plays out. It's really, really interesting. I've read that a few times as well.
I have that in my Audible line to read. I think you've suggested it 3 or 4 times. It's really long, which means
very long.
It takes several hours to read. All right, yeah. Favorite podcasts?
Favorite podcast? So I debated, am I going to tell the truth or am I going to say like it's a certain leadership podcast or something? Instead, I'm telling the truth. It's a show called Blank Check. And it's about movies. It's about blank check directors who have had massive success and are issued a series of blank checks to make whatever movies and passion projects that they want. Sometimes those checks fail. Sometimes those checks clear. That's actually the opening spiel. I've listened to it so many times. I know their spiel. And I love it because First off, it's conversational, it's enjoyable, but I actually think there's so many little nuggets in there of how to perceive art, how to find joy, delight, and interest in maybe films that I wouldn't otherwise experience. And that for me is really enriching as someone who still comes from an artistic background.
Awesome. Well, Charley, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and thanks all of you for tuning in. We appreciate it, and we will see you next time on the Driven Crowd Podcast.